While Tesla and Marconi competed for practical transatlantic wireless communication, there was already one company achieving it consistently. The power that changed the world would come from unseen waves. You think you know the history of radio? It's time to learn the whole funkin' story. Sayville, New York, is an idyllic American village at the turn of the 20th century beside the tranquil waters of the Great South Bay.
It was a fishing, agrarian economy at that time.
It was one of the few communities that had a newspaper, the Suffolk County News. They had an opera house. It was a bucolic spot.
But beneath the surface, a dark undercurrent flows that threatens to divide a community and nation.
It was a time of great fear.
The people living here were quite well aware of the fact we were at war.
It was a time of suspicion, harassment, and in some cases, violence.
From this charming hamlet will come spies and subterfuge. It will abet horrific acts of violence and help lead the U.S. into a world war. The great pioneers of a world-changing technology will arrive here on the eve of an impending conflict that will change everything.
The Marconi company really only had one serious rival in the early years. This was a German company called Telefunken.
In this ordinary suburb, might a profitable local business be in fact a Trojan horse for an adversarial nation?
What happened at the Telefunken site is one of the most fantastic, untold stories.
It's been a secret for so many years.
We're two countries linked by a nefarious network of invisible threads. This quiet town will soon be heard across the world. A new and powerful innovation is coming to America. But it will arrive in disguise. In May of 1911, 4 parcels of land bordering the railroad tracks in West Sayville, New York, were purchased by Stork & Company, a chocolate manufacturer, with its parent company based in Cologne, Germany. Questions immediately arise from the almost 80-acre transaction. One of the sellers reveals a pledge of secrecy surrounding the sale. His only comment is the site will be of considerable importance.
When the property was first being purchased by a, quote, chocolate factory, it was a great time because most of the employment was working the shellfish beds.
The women there got very, very excited over it because they could see themselves working in a chocolate factory.
Rumors circulate that a wireless station will be built on the land. But why would a chocolate factory need a wireless station?
The editor and owner of the Suffolk County News was Francis Hoag, and he was a consummate newspaper man. He became very interested. He did everything he possibly could to find out. He was getting no answers.
They really didn't know what was going on in the site, and to suddenly see large concrete structures that didn't really look like they were for a factory.
All of a sudden, you had a big fence being put up, and you had guards put in place. Why would you do this if you were going to have a chocolate factory?
By mid-August, ground is broken by the Foundation Company of New York City. The residents search for clues in the new construction, which becomes a popular topic in the town's central gathering place.
The Kensington Hotel was a major watering hole in Sayville. It was the center of local residents' activities.
Several of the men were staying there, And so Hoeg started to come and question them. And they told him as much as they possibly could about what they were building there. Still, he really didn't have a complete picture of what was going on.
Also interested in the work site is Justice Daniel D. White.
Justice White lived at the Kensington Hotel. He was very active in the Oysterman's Bank. He was a justice of the peace in Islip Town. He was a major figure in Sable, probably the major figure in Sable.
By early October, a new German-speaking facilitator arrives. Hoeg is unable to converse at length with him, but learns he is seeking to employ a large force of laborers. Hoeg publishes his frustrations, decrying the lack of transparency from the project, now under the name Stoic Brothers. He is told by a representative the project will be great publicity to Sayville, but the project backers are not seeking publicity. Quite the contrary, he adds.
Building was going on. It was in front of everybody, and yet the mystery was still there.
Growing with the mystery is a tower being erected on 3 pyramidal bases above a concrete foundation.
It looked like it was going to be a very tall tower, and no one could figure out why a chocolate factory would need a tower.
Concern grows when laborer Fred Hawkins is seriously injured on site, falling 35 feet from a perpendicular spar, fracturing his skull and arm.
So that just built up even more worries among many people.
With the brush now cleared, the construction site is visible. It is an enigmatic view to the locals. Massive cement pylons spring out from the ground, some sealed by a brick outer surface. Angled metal structures protrude from the concrete. They are arranged in a tripod pattern around the center, like a modern Stonehenge. A sad realization becomes clear. The masonry was beyond the needs of any chocolatier's shop.
The hopes and dreams of the West Sayville women were really going up in smoke.
They were disappointed they didn't get a job making chocolate.
It is the end of a sweet dream. But what might awaken in its place is yet unknown. There were still many questions of what was coming to Sayville. A new overseer was sent to continue the mission there, a Dutchman named Fritz Vandervoort. Francis Hoeg hoped Vandervoort would help unravel the mystery there.
He was not very open when he first came. However, first thing out of the box, he went to see the local architect, Isaac Green.
Vandervoort commissions Green to design a powerhouse on the property. At the same time, work on the tower continues, bringing its height to 300 feet.
As the tower went up, the baymen were overjoyed over this tower because they could use the tower to sight on. They would know where they were.
To Francis Hoeg, the contradiction was perplexing. How could such a high visibility project remain so secretive?
Vandervoort could not explain to him what it was going to be or who this company was.
But Hoeg persisted.
Hoeg went into the city to visit the ship Connecticut. The young radio operator said to him, "Well, this looks exactly like the operations of the Telefunken company in Germany. They build radio facilities. They come in and they do it very quietly because they are largely experimental."
The young wireless operator would be proven right.
The Stoic brothers actually did buy that property, not for themselves, but they bought it for Telefunken.
This aroused suspicions. Stoic had sold the land for the same amount paid. He was an advocating member of the Telefunken Company of Berlin. He was also a key financial supporter of Ferdinand Braun's wireless experimentation.
Telefunken was basically created by the German government because they were determined that Britain would not control wireless communication.
Telefunken was established by combining two German institutions, AEG and Siemens and Hask, with the purpose of advancing wireless telegraphy.
Telefunken would change the name to the Atlantic Communication Company, and this way they were an American company.
They were the shell company that represented the interests of the Germans.
Their main goal was to, yes, set up a radio station that would be shipped ashore, telegrams and news and information like that, but they also wanted to be able to reach Germany. There was a station in Neuen that they had.
The construction in Sayville continued, but with one less secret.
There was a sign put up. This sign was a large sign. It faced the railroad tracks, and it said Telefunken Company.
For Hogue and the residents of Sayville, the riddle was finally solved. Or so they thought. Nearby, in the town of Shoreham, New York, another gigantic tower stands as Nikola Tesla tries desperately to fundraise for its completion. The 187-foot-high construction is of a much different design and has remained dormant since some tests in 1903 startled the local residents.
J.P. Morgan has blocked him from completing Wardenclyffe. Not only did he not provide the funds that Tesla needed to complete it, but he stopped other people from investing in it. So Tesla was stuck.
The lab building appears abandoned as the inventor struggles to reopen its doors. To achieve this, much of Tesla's time has recently been spent at the New York Edison Company's Waterside Station.
The stories that Tesla and Edison were enemies is really a myth. While they were certainly rivals and probably weren't all that fond of each other, they did have a respect for each other.
Tesla is hard at work developing what he believes to be his next revolutionary invention, a bladeless disc turbine that operates at a staggering 50,000 RPMs.
When Tesla talked about having 50,000 RPMs, he was mocked by the engineers and scientists of his day.
The problem with Tesla's bladeless turbine is that the incredible speeds cause the blades to warp.
If Tesla can solve the problem, he will earn the financing to complete his Wardenclyffe wireless project, which will also cement his role in radio history.
From Tesla's point of view, what's most important to him is that he wants to be known as the inventor of radio. And he's less interested in being the actual person who builds all the radio stations all over the world. So even though Marconi has built stations on every continent and Telefunken has built stations on every continent, Tesla wants the recognition. That's more important than the actual operations.
But the delay in Tesla's grand vision for wireless has given his competitors an edge.
Tesla's wireless system was a part of a much bigger system that Tesla's planning. Tesla's planning on sending voice, pictures, power, electrical lighting by means of wireless. Marconi was just trying to send Morse code.
It was a wireless telegraph, so it was Morse code communication. It was basically, the telegraph without wires. He was only interested in one thing. I mean, Marconi was only interested in long-distance mobile wireless communication. If you compare Marconi to someone like Tesla, Tesla was interested in wireless communication, but he was interested in 100 other things at the same time.
Tesla's radio rivalry with Marconi goes back a decade.
At the same time that Marconi was working on it, Nikola Tesla in the United States was working on the same thing. And they were aware that they were each doing it, and there was a space race going on, a wireless race. While Marconi was in England working on perfecting his transmitter, the manager of his company, a man by the name of Hall, was in New York, and he went to see Tesla, who very openly and transparently was boasting to him, actually, look at my equipment here. I'm going to be sending signals across the Atlantic very soon. And Marconi's manager informed him, and he said, very cracking, because Tesla's going to do this any day now. And this is why Marconi decided he couldn't wait to put up a permanent station. He was desperate because at the same time, Tesla was already telling the press that he was about to do this any day now. So Marconi decided he would try to go across a shorter distance So he went to Newfoundland. It was actually several hundred miles closer to England than New York. Marconi decided he would try to use kites instead of a fixed tower to receive the signal. Marconi flew a kite 500 feet into the air and was able to receive the Morse code signal S from Cornwall, England.
As the technology progresses, Marconi is well positioned to dominate the medium.
By 1910 or 1911, people were sending wireless telegrams, businesses were using wireless to communicate, and governments especially, both in peacetime and especially in wartime.
Marconi's early successes made his name synonymous with wireless.
A wireless telegram was a Marconigram. They said that on the paper, Marconigram. His name was used for absolutely everything, and in fact, eventually they started licensing the name Marconi. It became a brand.
Marconi leverages his patents to eliminate competition.
In the United States, there was a very dynamic figure by the name of Lee DeForest, who was one of the important innovators in wireless. His company was folded into something called the United Wireless Telegraph Company. Marconi sued them. They had the largest number of stations in the United States at the time. Because they couldn't defend against the Marconi patent suit, they had to give up their assets. Marconi basically took them over in 1912. And this was a tremendous boon for the American Marconi Company.
The acquisition makes Marconi the most powerful communications provider in America, a development which irks Tesla, who feels his invention has been pirated.
Marconi, he wrote about using Tesla's equipment in 1901.
It's what's happening at Telefunken, though, that irks Marconi, who feels his system is being infringed upon. And what arrives there next may bring the legal proof he's seeking. In March of 1912, a ship sails across the Atlantic towards Sayville, New York. Its cargo contains all the electrical apparatus for the Telefunken site. Also on board is a talented radio mechanic who is tuned into the new technology. The young man's name is Ludwig Batterman.
Ludwig was in the Navy. He was a telegraph operator, and he did it for 3 years. He was discharged, and then he went to work for Telefunken.
The entire plant was built in Germany. It was tested in Germany. All the components of the transmitting plant were boxed up and shipped over here.
He had a small crew of people with him to set up the hardware and make it operational in Sayville.
For Ludwig, it was a difficult journey.
He actually hurt himself. They were unloading the equipment and he lost the tip of his finger.
There would be more heavy lifting in the new endeavor, where Ludwig would be charged with all the station's functions.
It's his responsibility as a supervisor to make the wireless tower operational.
Part of the cargo included a 35-kilowatt Quinch spark gap transmitter. It not only outperformed Marconi's spark gap system, but created a more pure radio signal. As the tower elevation progressed to 400 feet, Batterman custom-built electronics and finely tuned the system. They were rare skills in this new communications medium. To Ludwig, it came naturally.
Ludwig's a real technical guy. It's all about being efficient and getting the project done properly.
It will take a meticulous personality to help the Telefunken station reach its potential. But it was the station's potential reach that concerned the U.S. Navy.
They were worried that a foreign entity would have some communication ability, but the Navy wanted total control of radio communication. The Navy also was worried that Telefunken had better equipment.
There's a reason the Navy knows how good the German wireless system is.
They did use some of the Telefunken equipment on their ships.
The technology is based on the work of Telefunken's George von Arco and Adolf Slaby. It was a system the U.S. Navy found most reliable. The choice outrageous Marconi, who endeavors for a wireless monopoly on the high seas.
The Navy was interested in Marconi's technology, but they wanted to buy it, and Marconi wouldn't sell it. I mean, Marconi already had developed the business model of basically, we don't sell anything. We lease equipment, and we maintain the proprietary knowledge of the technology, and the U.S. Navy didn't want to hear that.
While Batterman works to make Telefunken operational, Marconi's status will rise as an iconic ship goes down. On April 14, 1912, the unsinkable Titanic strikes an iceberg on its maiden voyage. Equipped with a Marconi wireless system, the ship's telegraph operator, Jack Phillips, is able to send a distress signal. It is picked up 60 miles away by the Carpathia.
There was great loss of life, but also 700 people whose lives were saved because the ship was able to get a message off, and other ships in the area were able to get there and pick up the people who were in the lifeboats.
Absent a wireless system, the tragedy may have been much worse.
This really had a tremendous impact on the way people thought about wireless. I mean, people really understood that this was not a frivolous invention. It did not only have commercial applications, but it was really important in terms of public security and safety and so on.
The event would expand the use of radio communications worldwide.
In the wake of the Titanic disaster, regulations were actually put in place. Every important seagoing vessel was equipped with a wireless system, and most of them with a Marconi wireless system.
The disaster gives Marconi's already popular system a further boost.
Marconi really became an international rock star. He already was a global figure, but after the Titanic, he moved to another level.
For Tesla, it is a two-pronged defeat. His rival's wireless bona fides skyrocket, as John J. Astor, one of his greatest advocates, is among the Titanic dead. Meanwhile, he has been unable to perfect the bladeless disc turbine. For the cash-strapped Tesla, Wardenclyffe is now in extreme peril. But can a competing wireless project actually help save his laboratory? In July of 1912, a tall, slender shaft rises 477 feet from the Sayville Earth. The radio tower is finished. Though months away from being operational, it is an impressive engineering feat. The lofty tower was triangular in shape and composed of steel latticework 10 feet wide. The antenna was attached to a concrete foundation using a unique ball joint, which allowed the structure to move in the wind or be lowered to the ground and raised up again. The giant tower connected to the central point, making it appear to balance in the air.
The ball joint sat on pieces of glass to electrically isolate it from the ground.
Stabilizing the central tower is a combination of concrete and guy wires.
The wires that supported the tower went to 3 anchors.
The 3 anchor sets consisted of an inner and outer component. The inner anchors were approximately 15 feet wide by 30 feet high and located roughly 230 feet from the center base. The outer anchors were angled blocks finished with brickwork. Ironwork on the anchors was embedded at an angle that allowed the guy wires to converge over the central foundation, 125 feet in the air.
The entire tower was electrically live.
As the plant progresses, Fritz Vandervoort makes efforts to ingratiate himself with the town.
Vandervoort suddenly became more talkative. He actually explained to a reporter what the tower was like.
He then makes a gesture that wins over the townspeople.
The original tower was not quite 500 feet tall. Vandervoort had the American flag put on top of the tower, and that actually made the tower 500 feet tall.
Telefunken is becoming a source of pride in the community.
As the people realized what they had there, they were very excited about this. The people of Sayville and West Sayville started to really feel that that station was theirs.
Even Francis Hull's newspaper embraces the station and its new technology.
It was an exciting time here. The whole world was changing.
Change is indeed coming, and the Sayville station will play a role. With the arrival of autumn, Telefunken officially opens its doors to the public, taking the radio call letters SLI, and using a wavelength of 2,500 meters, the station will enable ship-to-shore message services.
You knew when a ship was coming in, you knew what the cargo was, you could prepare here to unload it, you knew you could send bills.
Someone could send a telegram to a particular passenger on the ship. They would also have, for instance, the latest stock market reports. This was one of the attractions of wireless.
Unlike Marconi's business model, Telefunken promises to accept messages using any wireless system.
Some ships had Telefunken, some ships had Marconi, and they would not talk to each other because there was competition.
Though Telefunken has the capability to receive a Marconigram, sending one is more difficult.
There was no way that a radio transmitter created by another system would be able to communicate with a Marconi receiver. Part of the contract said they must exclusively use Marconi equipment in all of their communication. In other words, even if it was technically possible, it would be legally impossible for anyone using the Marconi system to intercommunicate.
But Telefunken is looking beyond ship to shore. They announced plans to send direct communications between Sayville and Neuen, Germany.
In the early days of wireless, long distance wasn't even thought of.
Telefunken is quickly making it a reality. In January of 1913, they welcomed members of the U.S. Armed Forces and Department of Commerce to inspect the station. Present is Commander W.H.G. Bullard of the U.S. Navy.
Captain Bullard was an interesting man. He was the leading radio person. He was one of the premier founders of what we call the modern Navy. He became quite famous.
Fritz van der Boe proudly gives a tour of the site, while Ludwig Bademan prepares for a demonstration. Despite bad weather, the guests witness a message sent from Sayville to Neuen, Germany. To the relief of Bademan, the Telefunken station is a success. They have sent a message without relay over a distance of 4,000 miles. It is an historic moment. But for W.H.G. Bullard, emotions are reserved.
While he was pleased with technology and the fact that we'd have a better transmitter here in America, he was also upset or worried that the group that was running it also would be a competitor of the United States and the United States Navy.
They must have had thoughts that Telefunken, being a foreign power, would eventually cause them some problems.
But is the concern justified or paranoia? Telefunken now has a working transatlantic wireless system, but they seek to make it better. Throughout 1913, Bademan upgrades its machinery. The station also changes its call letters to WSL, which better identifies its West Sayville location. Telefunken is determined to surpass the limitations of wired communications.
If you wanted to communicate between New York and London, well, you had the underwater cable, but that was very complicated, and you couldn't use the cable, for example, if you were on a ship.
The transatlantic cable allowed messages to be exchanged, but remember, it was a wire, so you would have to wait for the line to clear. When your message finished, they could send another. Radio did allow for faster passage of messages.
On January 30th, 1914, Telefunken gains international attention. President Woodrow Wilson successfully sends a wireless reply to the Kaiser from the Sayville plant. The message in part reads, I congratulate your majesty on this additional tie of closer communication between the United States and Germany. Now, Telefunken has been given a symbolic stamp of approval by two world leaders. There are, however, challenges.
As the technology developed to be able to communicate over longer and greater distances, there were a whole range of problems that emerged in terms of the quality of the communication. For example, there were atmospheric disturbances, the issue of weather, what would happen with interference, and so on. They were always working on these different aspects.
To help correct for this, transatlantic messages are limited to late-night transmissions.
It was done at night because the propagation was better at night for the frequency that they were using.
They also experiment with a clever punch key system that can cut Morse code into a special tape ribbon.
They would run that through a machine that would transmit this information at night. That was way, way ahead for the time.
Presetting the messages allows for transmitting many at once. Adjusting the tape motor speed can reduce the transmission duration.
The perforated tape gave them an ability to send a large amount of information in a short period of time.
American radio experts are awestruck by Telefunken, which to Ludwig Bettelmann's delight seems to outperform even the highest power stations in operation. After his success, Atlanta Communications offers him another $25 a month to help set up a wireless station in New York City. With two continents connected, a new wireless age has begun.
Telefunken did what no one else accomplished. Telefunken transmitted on a regular basis across the big pond. Marconi was practical. Marconi transmitted ship to shore, but he wasn't doing across the big pond.
His own passion was to increase distance and mobility and quality of the communication. He really believed that communication would be a good thing for humankind, that it would improve people's lives, it would be an instrument of peace and commerce and goodwill.
But instead of bringing countries together, might wireless instead tear the world apart? On July 28, 1914, war breaks out in Europe.
It began with the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand by a Serb. So Austro-Hungary decided to attack Serbia.
The conflict quickly expands to include Germany, who invades Belgium a week later. As a result, Great Britain enters the fight on August 4th, 1914.
So you had Austro-Hungary and Germany now fighting against Russia, France, and England.
On the same day Britain declares war, American telegraph operators, as well as amateurs, pick up messages sent from Telefunken to German cruisers at sea.
People eavesdrop on various conversations. You're sending a message through the air which anyone can receive.
Many amateur radio enthusiasts see themselves as a wireless civilian watch. Almost immediately, there is a report of an intercepted message by an amateur claiming the British liner Lusitania is being pursued by two German cruisers and heading back to port. Though not confirmed, the Lusitania would make it safely back this time. President Wilson is in a precarious position. He endeavors to maintain neutrality, but fears wireless might be exploited for belligerent use. As pressures mount, Ludwig Bettelmann is forced into an unwanted role.
He ended up being a spokesman for the company, and that bothered him. So here you got a guy that has broken English at best. He can't communicate that well. He didn't like the role. He's not comfortable in that situation.
Bettelmann acknowledges that coded messages were sent from Telefunken to the German cruisers Dresden and Karlsruhe. He adds that the practice is not uncommon in the industry.
You had businesses that sent coded messages so they get their information back and forth without other businesses listening in.
Being a mouthpiece for Telefunken made Ludwig uneasy.
On the political end of it, He's getting sucked into it. Between the company and the citizens in Savo, that was a lot of anxiety for him.
Placing him in this position as the president of the Atlantic Communication Company, a somewhat shadowy figure named Dr. Carl George Frank, a wireless pioneer in his own right. Frank has strong ties with the German leadership. As controller of the Sayville plant, Frank seeks to cloak his nationalistic intentions to an unknowing bottomman who is focused on running a legitimate business at Telefunken.
They ran the wireless station 24 hours, 7 days a week. So he had the day shift, and two of his other guys would work both the afternoon and the night shift. As far as Ludwig's involvement and what he understood, the reason for the wireless station, there was a big business, commercial business.
But the Kaiser has another purpose for Telefunken.
So what happens now is that Great Britain cuts the German transatlantic cable. So now the only way that Germany can communicate between their home country and the United States is through wireless means. But secretly, they're also using their wireless operation to help coordinate their naval ships and their submarines.
Telefunken's role has just surged to the forefront of a world conflict.
The receiving station at Sayville, New York, was one of the key links in the German global communication system because so many other German stations had been put out of business by the British and the French.
Assistant Secretary to the Navy, Franklin Roosevelt, calls an emergency meeting with Captain Bullard. As a result, President Wilson issues an order prohibiting all wireless transmissions of an unneutral nature.
President Wilson was to send Navy personnel sensors to Telefunken to look at the messages that were going out, the messages that were coming in.
Ensign H.B. Grove, H.L. Butler, and Daniel Cousins are chosen for the duty. They're ordered to hold any suspicious messages. One sensor will remain present at all times to inspect the German operators. Closing the station is not an option.
Telefunken was, in theory, a private concern.
President Wilson, he did not want us in the war. He spent a lot of his time trying to work with Germany and trying to stay neutral.
With the transatlantic cable out of commission, Carl Frank must improve Telefunken's signal reception to keep communications open.
Armstrong had a circuit using a vacuum tube called a regenerative receiver. This took a signal that was so small and amplified it to the point where they could read it.
Edwin H. Armstrong, who would later invent FM radio, had just patented a breakthrough in wireless communications.
Armstrong was picking up impulses from Hawaii, from New York City.
Armstrong's regenerative receiver is exactly what Telefunken needs.
Armstrong brought his equipment to Telefunken, demonstrated it for them, showed them what it could do.
Armstrong's invention works flawlessly, instantly resulting in a much clearer signal. He offers to sell the patent for $50,000.
They didn't want to pay for it, but he leased it to them.
One of Armstrong's biggest influences is inventor Nikola Tesla.
To show you the extent of Armstrong's adoration of Nikola Tesla, when Tesla died, Armstrong was one of his pallbearers.
Sharing Armstrong's admiration for Tesla are some of Germany's top wireless innovators.
You have these reputable scientists like Adolf Slaby, Ferdinand Braun, Jonathan Zenneck, all these top scientists in Germany, and they felt guilty because they weren't paying Tesla his proper royalties, and they were using his equipment.
With a plant in nearby Shoreham, Tesla will play a role in Telefunken's future. But at present, Telefunken is beginning to alarm the residents of Sayville, who feel the station may be used to aid the German Navy.
Telefunken was both embraced by some and also looked upon with suspicion by others.
It's a German company. They're not getting much information about it. And since they weren't getting any information, they sort of dealt with it from a worst-case scenario.
The war overseas is creating divisions at home.
Many of the local residents in this community were German Americans, and they were proud Americans at the same time.
But now there is growing distrust towards people of German descent.
Ludwig did feel pressure from the townspeople. It intensified. There was articles in the paper. There's more and more pointing at suspicions of the station, what they were doing, what they were communicating. And at one point, because of the number of people that would show up at the gate and basically harass them, he was starting to get concerned for his own safety.
For the first time, the tense atmosphere makes Ludwig and his crew feel at risk. Ludwig decides to do what he hoped to never do.
He actually went out, got a permit, and got a pistol. And he never owned one before.
Has an invisible war already come to America? It is the fall of 1914, and Captain Bullard wonders if the presidential order will keep Telefunken neutral. Rumors persist that in spite of Navy censors, the station is somehow managing to communicate with the German naval fleet.
If you didn't know exactly who was sending the messages or where they were actually going, you might allow something to go through that was a message of military importance. The censors that were sent were not knowledgeable of exactly what might be in a message.
Bullard fears Telefunken may aid the German war effort by exposing enemy naval positions and other violations of neutrality.
The theory was that Telefunken was part of a German spy network operating out of New York City and the Jersey ports.
A disturbing incident offers credence to the theory. On the night of October 23rd, 4 men were killed and 1 seriously injured when their car crashes in Hempstead, Long Island.
In one of the victims' pockets, they found an iron cross, like the kind the Kaiser would award, and a return ticket to Germany on board the ship Fatherland.
The Fatherland and other ships of its class have been commandeered by the German Navy for troop transport. But since war began, the Fatherland has been sitting idle at its neutral port to avoid British destroyers. The men who departed carrying large amounts of cash are thought to be German emissaries on their way to the Telefunken station. According to newspaper reports, the group had stopped at a roadhouse and asked directions to Sayville before speeding off at a high rate of speed. The men wore new, tightly laced khaki leggings.
It was the kind of clothes you'd wear if you were planning to walk through a lot of thick underbrush and thorn bushes, like the land that surrounded the Telefunken site.
They weren't going to come through the main gate. They were going to access some other area and get to the station.
The next day, 2 broken chemical bottles with a strong odor are discovered under the wrecked automobile.
It had a strong smell of chloroform, and the label in red ink said, "Keep in a cool place."
Just prior to the crash, the auto was closely pursued by 2 men on motorcycles who quickly fled the scene.
According to the paper, some believed the motorcycle riders were either detectives hired to protect U.S. neutrality or spies hired by the enemies of Germany.
Adding to the mystery was the peculiar circumstance of F.J. Gassman, the only survivor of the crash.
After the accident, someone giving their name as Dr. J.C. Sarr Jr. quickly checked Gassman out of the hospital against the wishes of the doctors, who thought he was still in critical condition and in danger of dying.
Ignoring the medical staff, Dr. Sarr removes Gassman anyway.
It's possible they were trying to get a message out, either to Germany or to nearby ships, and had to get around the Navy censors. One of the theories was that it involved getting safe passage for the Fatherland, which at that time was contemplating making a run for the open sea.
As a result of the incident, 14 armed men were sent to guard the Telefunken station. The men were comprised of United States Marshals, U.S. Treasury agents, and men from the New York Navy Yard. The night guard will be twice as strong as the day guard. The incident rattles Ludwig Bodemann, who was busy adding an extension to the main station building. Soon after, an intimidating letter arrives. Gentlemen, enclosed find a report of the recent German atrocity committed by yourselves, and of which, no doubt, you will offer no explanation. As you can see, we are harmless creatures commonly known as wireless bugs, who have listened to your station so much that we can almost call you by your first names and have been quite anxious to see your machines. Yours very truly, Robert Burns, Babylon, New York. This letter is followed up by an in-person visit by the group of 4 who attempt to enter the property only to be repelled by Wartime. During this turbulent time, Ludwig searches for peace.
Because of the very stressful situation, he did have one thing that he really liked to do. He loved to listen to classical music. He bought a Coupe de Lido, which was a performance car in the day, and he raced that up and down the streets. That kept his mind off the politics and the other activity he had to endure.
To prevent any more unwanted trespassing at the station, Batterman has the remaining brush and bramble cleared. Across the world, the recent meeting in Berlin between Ambassador to the United States Johann Heinrich von Bernstorff and Major Walter Nicolai, the head of the Kaiser's Secret Intelligence Service, has set a strategy in motion. Bernstorff's mission is to keep America out of the war while undermining its ability to trade with the enemies of Germany. The tools to be used are diplomacy and sabotage. Back in the States, President Wilson unknowingly helps his plan.
For Bernstorff, President Wilson gave him the permission to use the Telefunken station. And so he sent all of his reports through there, and he received reports from there.
In February of 1915, Telefunken sends a message to Washington from the German Admiralty. It is a warning of all mercantile shipping to avoid the French coast, where England is sending large transports of troops. The German Navy threatens to use all possible means to oppose them. It is an unsettling phrase. Germany's naval attaché is Captain Karl Boyet. He is also sending messages through Sayville. Though they are inspected by Navy censors, some fear that messages may disguise hidden codes.
The Germans were well known to have code books where certain words had other meanings.
By the end of March, the German Admiralty makes good on its threat, as the first American citizen is killed by submarine warfare. Leon Thrasher drowns after the British steamship Falaba is torpedoed. Ambassador Bernstorff defends the action, arguing that ample time was given for passengers to abandon ship. Wilson fears an escalation of tensions.
Wilson was still neutral. They were using German equipment on the U.S. naval ships. So if they were to enter the war, they would have to dismantle one of their most important means of communication for their naval ships. So it's a tremendous irony which is going on at that time, and it may have played a role in Wilson's neutrality.
Wireless technology becomes another battlefront for Germany, this time a legal one. With the success of Telefunken, Marconi sees a threat to his worldwide dominance of the medium.
Marconi was able to keep Telefunken out of most global markets using patent litigation.
He sues the Atlantic Communication Company.
On a smaller scale, it was the rivalry between Britain and Germany. You had the British Marconi Company, German Telefunken. Germany was Marconi's nemesis. His early rivals were German scientists. His commercial rivals were German.
At this crucial time in the conflict, Germany is isolated and can't afford to lose the key to its Western communications. Between the looming legal fight and critical station upgrades, there is one person who may help.
They were well aware of Tesla.
Adolf Slaby, who was part of Telefunken, one of the founders, said that Tesla was the father of wireless communication, and he insisted that Tesla be hired. And in fact, Tesla is being paid by Telefunken as a consultant during the litigation because they want Tesla to testify, because they know his patents will be much more comprehensive and explain that Tesla is the real inventor of the wireless system that they're using, not Marconi.
Tesla agrees that he has patent priority in wireless, he will file his own lawsuit against Marconi in April 1915.
Carl George Frank, he's running Atlantic Communications, which is the American arm of Telefunken. So they call in Ferdinand Braun and they call in Jonathan Zenneck, not only to help rebuild Sayville, but also to testify in this lawsuit.
Tesla makes the short trip from Shoreham to Sayville.
So he meets with Jonathan Zenneck, and Tesla goes out and he measures all the equipment, he looks at everything, he says, you've got to increase your ground connection. So that's what they did. They went out like 500 more yards.
Tesla also, with his tower, would have a tremendous ground system. Telefunken, they also needed that there.
They tripled the connection, which is what Tesla was always talking about.
The Telefunken ground system did better than transmitting power to Noyon.
Additionally, an upgraded 100-kilowatt transmitter is installed along with 3 new towers.
The Germans were continually improving their radio abilities, and the Navy was very suspicious of the construction going on at the site, and they wanted to get photos, and Cousins went and did it.
To get an unobstructed view, Cousins attempts to climb the main antenna.
When he tried to get off the tower and his foot touched ground while his hands were still on the live tower.
The tower was supposed to be shut off. The current wasn't shut off and he was severely burned.
The shock knocks Cousins unconscious. A doctor works for over an hour to revive him. Cousins survives, but wonders if the act was intentional. With all the towers erected, the wire framework weaves within the poles to create what is termed an umbrella antenna, a component of which compensates electrically for a lack of height.
They ran wires from the main tower to these shorter towers. By adding these capacitor top hat wires, they were tuning the system to get as much power radiated as possible.
The upgrades of Telefunken are an enormous success. The plant astonishingly triples its capacity. For Tesla, the thriving station provides hope.
So things were looking up for Tesla. He finally had a deal with the Germans, and he was going to get at least $1,500 a month, which in those days was a lot of money. He was hoping to use the money to pay off his debt to the Waldorf Astoria, because he transferred the property of Wardenclyffe to the Waldorf. Now was his chance.
Since J.P. Morgan's death in 1913, Tesla has been courting the financier's son to invest in the uncompleted world wireless system.
He's trying to prove to J.P. Morgan Jr. that his ideas are right, because if Sayville is going to work in a better way than it did before he came on board, then maybe Wardenclyffe is worth resurrecting.
Undeniably, the recent improvements have transformed the station. Telefunken is now the most powerful wireless station in the world. But the question is, how exactly will this new power be used? As war in Europe expands, so does the Telefunken station. It happened almost silently, but now massive towers spring skyward from the ground. News from the front, mostly edited by England, portrays a brutal Germany, tainting the once proud view villagers had of their wireless plant.
It brought about a big change in the way that the local people saw the Germans and the German station.
The capabilities of the Telefunken plant are demonstrated again when the British luxury liner Lusitania fails to reach port. People worldwide fear the worst for the missing ship before the Sayville station is able to reach it by wireless.
Telefunken sent a message and the Lusitania replied. Now, the Lusitania did not give her position.
For security reasons, Captain Dow merely replies to Telefunken with the message, Lusitania, okay. Heavy seas are blamed for the delay. For the Sayville station, it is an amazing accomplishment.
This does show us that Telefunken and the German radio system was able to cover large distances and communicate with vessels other than just German vessels.
America is neutral, but it's trading munitions and supplies with the enemies of Germany. Germany's trade options are disrupted by the British naval blockade. Count von Brennstoff makes his displeasure known, and when a series of unexplained explosions occur in American munitions factories, suspicions turn to Germany.
The DuPont gunpowder plant in New Jersey blew up. An explosion at the Wright Chemical Works killed 3 people. Although some could have been accidents, with so many happening at once, it's hard to see them all as a coincidence.
England, anxious to get America into the war, implicates Telefunken in German subterfuge. The British cryptographic service, referred to as Room 40, monitors radio transmissions to and from Germany. Unbeknownst to the world, Room 40 is in possession of a German naval code book, a secret they wish to keep. But in an ironic twist, Captain Boyad is in possession of a British Admiralty code book. Germany's covert operations are being facilitated through Ambassador Brennstoff with the help of Boyad, military attaché Franz von Papen, and Dr. Heinrich Albert, who is charged with distributing $150 million for the mission.
They're all stationed in Washington, D.C. and in New York, and they're funding these operations of subterfuge and disinformation in America to prevent us from entering the war.
Under their authority is Paul Koenig, who is charged with recruiting a network of German sympathizers, spies, and saboteurs. Koenig is described as having arms like an ape and the bodily strength of one. He has a reputation for brutality and caution. In New York, Koenig has paid informants on every pier that provide a wealth of information for the German war effort.
Telefunken became the hub of a spy network. People on the docks picked up what was sailing, what the manifests were, and that all was relayed to Telefunken in West Sayville, and that was relayed to Neuen, Germany.
A top priority for Bernstorff's secret networks to prevent the U.S. from aiding the Entente powers. But his agents will have to act under the watchful eye of William J. Flynn, the chief of the United States Secret Service. Flynn is responsible for investigating suspected sabotage.
Flynn had made a name for himself by putting away a lot of members of the mafia. And he's also given credit for organizing the New York City detectives into a highly effective agency.
As the conflict advances, so does the wireless legal war.
Atlantic Communication brought over Ferdinand Braun, who actually had shared the Nobel Prize in physics with Marconi in 1909. So Marconi and Braun were very familiar with each other, and they found themselves on opposite sides of the witness stand in this case. At any point in time, I mean, Marconi's company was involved in patent suits all over the world, and he himself didn't necessarily get involved in all of them. The case with Atlantic Communication was so important, his company said, you better go over and testify yourself.
They're all going to meet and decide who is the real inventor of wireless communication.
As the trial begins, a chilling message appears in the New York papers that gets Marconi's attention.
The Germans had warned us that any ships flying the British flag would be torpedoed.
The threat appears near the ads for the ship Lusitania. Marconi is a frequent passenger on the vessel. In fact, it is how he arrived in New York for the trial.
Actually, as it turned out, it was the last voyage of the Lusitania. Before the voyage, it was sunk.
On May 7th, 1915, the RMS Lusitania is torpedoed by a German U-boat off the southern coast of Ireland. It sinks in 18 minutes, leaving over 1,000 dead. A civilian passenger ship has been destroyed, and the world is outraged. Germany justifies the attack, classifying Lusitania as a naval vessel due to its cargo.
The Germans said they sank the ship because it was carrying munitions. Turned out they were right. It was.
The official manifest of the Lusitania includes 1,250 cases of shrapnel, 12 cases of fuses from Bethlehem Steel, and almost 90 tons of food supplies for the Royal Navy.
We really were supposed to be neutral.
The Germans' defense does little to ease anger in the U.S. 128 of the Lusitania's dead were American citizens. Sentiment begins to turn on Germany, and more questions arise.
These submarines seem to know where ships are coming from, coming out of New York, that have contraband on them. How are they getting this information?
All signs point to Telefunken.
There is no doubt Telefunken transmitted what Lusitania was carrying and when they were leaving the port.
And beyond sending departure information, could Telefunken have had a more direct role? Using false passports, 2 German spies had surveilled several journeys of the doomed ship and observed a pattern. The Lusitania would traverse the Atlantic alone with little fear of U-boats due to its superior speed. Upon reaching the Irish coast, instructions via wireless would relay where to meet the convoy that would escort Lusitania into port. Questions have always surrounded the actions of Lusitania's Captain Turner and the inconsistencies of the British Admiralty that led to the tragedy. According to New York Sun reporter John Price Jones, the answer to the mystery can be found, in part, at Sayville. On the fateful day, Jones contends that upon reaching the Irish coast, Lusitania will not receive its rendezvous coordinates from the British Admiralty, but from Telefunken. Lusitania is told to proceed 10 miles south of Old Head of Kinsale by the false transmission. Instead of the escort, it will meet the position of a German U-boat.
So you can see where this theory came from. Sayville had the capability. Captain Boyette knew the British codes and the locations of the U-boats. Now, the U-boat that sank the Lusitania may not have expected it to come within range, but under this scenario, it may have been sent right to him from 3,000 miles away.
We know for a fact that they could communicate with Lusitania, so it was possible.
Whether or not events unfolded as described by Jones, the theory illustrates the prominence Telefunken had achieved in the field of wireless.
They had communicated with the Lusitania on more than one occasion, from as far away as the coast of Ireland. From there, the ship replied, "I'm receiving you perfectly." Critics had cast doubt on Sayville's ability at the time, but there are now several confirmed examples.
Contradictory messages follow from the Admiralty, creating chaos leading up to the event. In the aftermath, several inquiries are held. The Admiralty denies sending the order that led to Lusitania's destruction, and its hostility towards Captain Turner clouds the legitimacy of the inquest. As a result, many suspect the British Admiralty of a cover-up, with some suggesting a grim motive to deflect blame or perhaps force America into the war.
The event did have an impact on how Germans were perceived in America.
Disturbed by Telefunken's implied role in the Lusitania tragedy, it is a turning point for Ludwig Batterman. On May 8, 1915, he files a declaration of intention with the U.S. Department of Labor.
He actually wanted to be an American citizen. He liked the freedoms that was available there, and he wanted to be the model citizen.
Like all of America now, Sayville is a town on edge. At the Kensington Hotel, Justice Daniel D. White has noticed something strange over recent weeks.
He would see the American radio operators who were supposed to be watching what was going on, drinking and having a good time way into the late hours.
Daniel Cousins was being wined and dined by the Germans at the Kensington Hotel.
If Cousins believes he was purposely shocked on the tower, he is holding no grudges towards his new German friends.
Justice White began to get a little bit suspicious about this. Several of the German radio operators, they were managing to keep the American Navy men away from the station for periods of time.
In light of the Lusitania sinking, White wonders what might be happening at Telefunken in their absence.
He reported it to his friend, Francis Hoeg, at the paper. Now, Hoeg wanted to investigate this, but because he was well known, he wasn't going to get anywhere. He knew that. So he had a very good friend who was the editor of a New York newspaper, and he found out what was going on. He went back to New York, and it came out in the newspaper. All of a sudden, all of this started to come together.
Cousins is relieved of his duties, and more censors are dispatched to Sayville as the wireless legal war is progressing in Brooklyn, New York.
Marconi is there, Zenek and Brun, and also John Stone. Stone is there, and he is the president of the Electrical Society.
Marconi had this spiel that he would give. He would get on the witness stand and he would talk for about a half an hour about how he started in his parents' villa and blah, blah, blah. And he would go on and on and on with the story. And eventually he would get around to the particular case, the particular patent infringement that was at issue here.
One of which was obtained by Oliver Lodge in 1900 and has since been transferred to Marconi's company. Also in dispute is the alleged violation of his 1904 patent in wireless telegraphy. Additional patents would later become an issue for Telefunken.
Marconi claimed that his plumbing valve patent was being infringed by Sayville's use of Lee DeForest's Audion as an amplifier and generator of high-frequency oscillations.
Nikola Tesla, who has filed a separate action against Marconi, claims the coupled tuned circuits his Tesla coil produces is the key to wireless communication.
Many people were now using the Tesla oscillator, including Marconi. He didn't totally understand what he was using. Marconi's first patent was based on a Hertz spark gap system. When Zenek testified, Zenek said that Tesla had this continuous wave frequency and Marconi had this pulse frequency, so Marconi's system could never be used. When it comes down to what's very interesting is John Stone's testimony, who said, I studied all of the different systems, and the simple fact of the matter is they're all based on Tesla's system. He says in his testimony, I didn't realize how important Tesla was until I actually went back into the research and looked at his patents and looked at what he actually did and realized when we were using oscillators and Tesla coils that it was really Tesla's system. So even in 1915, scientists of the day didn't realize Tesla's accomplishment, and the reason was because he had sunk everything into Wardenclyffe, and Wardenclyffe was this standing ghost that he was unable to launch.
Tesla's absence from the wireless sector may negatively impact the ruling. Even with Stone's testimony, there is one fact.
Marconi was really the first person to use radio waves to communicate. I mean, and that's it. I mean, that sums up what he did, and that sums up his importance.
As the trial continues, the technical nature of the testimony is proving difficult to distinguish the differences between the two wireless systems. Federal Court Judge Beater seeks a better understanding of the evidence. In a dramatic move, Beater orders that court will be held at Sayville, where the system can be examined in person. On May 20th, Marconi arrives at Telefunken. Judge Beater and the other trial participants tour the facility to inspect the apparatus in dispute. Witnesses for both sides explain the wireless process. Marconi himself demonstrates the system by sending a message to the government station at Arlington. It is again an historic moment at Telefunken as Marconi becomes yet another wireless pioneer to step foot on its grounds. His presence there is celebrated by the local paper.
The press loved him, saw him as somewhat of an exotic figure.
The next day, the proceedings would return to Brooklyn, New York.
The case was going on, and then, while the case was at issue, Italy entered the war, and Marconi was summoned by the King of Italy to come and advise on radio communication. The telegram summoning him was delivered to him right there in the courtroom, and the judge said, well, of course, go on, and postpone the case. Marconi ended up spending the war in an Italian uniform.
The trial delay is good news for Atlantic Communications. It means telefunking can continue to operate until a verdict is reached. A verdict, however, will never be reached. With its on-site trial over, Ludwig Bademan makes it through a stressful week. He heads to Terry's jewelry store to purchase some new music to relax to.
He had quite a collection of classical records, so he went back several times to get the records, and then over time, I think he found something more interesting than the records at the shop.
The young pretty sales clerk is N.C. Shattuck. The attraction is instant. Ludwig's music collection will grow expansively over the next few months.
Over time, they got to be more than just friends.
For Ludwig, N.C. becomes a needed escape from the tumultuous world around him. And the world around him is igniting. To the shock of federal investigator W. Flynn, the first half of 1915 has seen suspicious fires in munition factories across the country. Supply ships are also meeting with destruction. Though most ignite at sea, unexploded incendiary bombs are found in the cargoes of the ships. The destructive devices built by the Germans are termed pencil bombs. They are thin, cigar-sized, hollow tubes with copper discs separating two volatile acids that, when combined, create an intense flame. The acids eat through the copper and mix, creating a crude, timed explosive. The thickness of the copper determines the detonation time, and the high temperature destroys all evidence. Paul Koenig has little problem getting them aboard ships through his vast saboteur network on the pier. Meanwhile, a German U-boat torpedoes the American tanker SS Gulflight, claiming its flag was not visible. The ship survives, but 3 more Americans are killed. The mounting aggression requires information, but how can Germany execute such plots when its communications have been so isolated? William Flynn can think of only one possibility.
Telefunken. It was the communication from the German interest in the United States to the German Foreign Ministry in Berlin.
But any nefarious actions by Telefunken are being cleverly hidden under the cover of a profitable business.
The ability to hide in plain sight was a problem that the United States government faced. As the war in Europe progressed, the United States was being pushed closer and closer to war in spite of Woodrow Wilson wanting to avoid it.
Though he considers taking over the Sayville station, Wilson instead sends more Navy officers there. Messages inspected by the Navy censors are punched onto the perforated tape by the German operators and later sent out by wireless. But suspicions persist, as outside Navy and amateur radio technicians report strange anomalies in late-night messages transmitted from Telefunken.
One method they did use was spacing.
Extending spaces or adding extra dots to innocent transmissions could get coded messages past Navy censors. Here the code is hidden in the method of the sending rather than in the message itself. And then there were the mysterious sounds emanating from Telefunken late at night.
Well, they referred to it as the Now Buzz.
The sound is described as a Titanic bumblebee sped through space. Captain Bullard is convinced Sayville is sending unneutral messages, but other than a strange buzz, he has no proof.
All along the Atlantic coast, the United States Navy had radio listening stations. Captain Bullard wanted them to listen in and see what they could find out about the actual messages being sent.
Fire Island was told to stand down and write down what they heard.
Captain Bullard got really nothing out of the locals or even the Navy radio station in the area.
Flynn and Bullard, along with the resources of the U.S. Navy, are desperate to solve the riddle. But the answer will come from an unlikely source.
Charles Apgar, an amateur radio operator, also heard the buzz from Sayville.
My great-grandfather was an amateur scientist, astronomer, musician, professional car salesman, and also worked at New York Life Insurance Company.
He even has a part-time job with the Marconi company, which helps to fulfill his favorite hobby, wireless technology.
He also was father of Virginia Apgar, who is extremely well known in medical circles for being the developer of the Apgar score, which most newborn children get.
Apgar's garage of custom-built wireless gear appears more like an obsession than a hobby.
He built what was supposedly the most powerful amateur radio station in the world. It looks like a Rube Goldberg contraption that, you think it's a Dr. Frankenstein setup.
To fill in the gaps, Apgar will need to improvise.
You need to have a fairly sizable antenna to receive the different wavelengths. And since he didn't have any metal towers to put stuff on, he basically used the trees in his backyard. So he started off narrow at the ground and went up into the trees 60 or 70 feet across at the widest point.
Could this radio amateur hold the key to the annoying buzz? One thing is certain, Apgar's homemade setup has a capability beyond the U.S. Navy's. Charles Apgar can record radio.
His desire to learn how to record was really purely intellectual curiosity. He worked on the development of what became the amplifier, called the ampliphone circuit. The challenge was when people were doing early recordings, the quality of the sound was virtually unusable. His ability to amplify those sounds was what led to the ability to do recordings that became so much more important. He was using that in conjunction with existing recording technology to merge the two into something that would be useful.
With his high-power receiver and ampliphone circuit connected to a dictaphone, Apgar could record transmissions onto wax cylinders. According to legend, it was when his equipment powered down that he made an incredible discovery.
He made an attempt to record on a wax cylinder. All he got was a buzz. However, the Edison equipment has to be continually wound. And one time, when he did not rewind it and the RPM of the machine slowed down, he heard Morse code.
That was when he realized that these were messages that were being sent.
You can disguise a sound by accelerating its playback rate. Here's a Morse code sample sped up 500 times. And this is the Morse code at its normal rate. So this was a really ingenious way of getting messages past the Navy at that time.
Whether the messages were sent at high or normal speeds, Apgar's method of recording was vital for holding Telefunken accountable.
When you send Morse code and you try to just listen to it, it's really hard to figure out. It was typically via headphones that they had tightly clamped to their ears. It was not a very efficient way to receive information. People would miss things. His technology of allowing him to transcribe everything back in real time would have been very important had they been speeding up the messages.
Charles Apgar's recordings confirmed that Germany has violated neutrality through Telefunken.
Telefunken nefariously was able to get out information.
And so he was part of the actual discovery of what was going on.
I was called on by the United States Secret Service to help them investigate the alleged non-neutrality of the Telefunken station at Sayville, Long Island. You see, I had been most fortunate in having constructed a very efficient receiving set.
L.R. Crum was the chief radio inspector for the government. He went to L.R. Crum's office, and L.R. Crum immediately walked him up to a different floor in the same building to meet Mr. Flynn. William Flynn, as head of Secret Service, knew virtually nothing about wireless and was really at a loss for what to do. The government had virtually no capability in that space. William Flynn literally pulled out a wad of bills. Here's for expenses, go get what you need. Part of the money he was given, he went around Manhattan trying to find a bunch of wax cylinders. The wax cylinders were not in great supply. He did, I think, 20 wax cylinders that first night. He ended up monitoring the station for 2 weeks. He had 175 wax cylinders at the end of it. He knew very early on that they were really onto something.
They began at 11 o'clock at night at Sayville, sending messages to Germany until 2 o'clock, sometimes 2:30. I seldom got to bed in the morning before 3 o'clock.
He'd sell cars and pianos all day, and then he would stay up most of the night recording his radio signals and then transcribe them and have a report the next morning into the Naval Radio Inspector. I don't know how he did it.
This that you are about to hear is one of the original records that I made years ago, which I took from the air in 1915 from the telefunken station, and which were non-neutral messages.
His first tip-off that something might be amiss, there were these odd pauses in the tape. It doesn't make sense, these gaps in the messages themselves.
One reads, send always invoice before shipping knives. Well, in reality, that meant in code instructions to the German submarines about enemy shipping.
When you think about what he accomplished, he went from knowing virtually nothing about wireless. At age 45 was when he first got interested, and within a couple of years, he was doing stuff that nobody else in the world was probably doing at that point.
After the Navy was shown by Charles Apgar, who had proven that there was some nefarious things going on at the radio station, messages going out in spite of the fact that there were sensors sitting there, the Navy took over operation. The problem was they had to keep many of the Germans on because only they knew how to operate the actual equipment to get it to work, function, and maintain it.
While Telefunken denies the allegations, Karl Frank mocks the possibility of recording radio from the airwaves. Ultimately, Atlantic Communications will not protest the government takeover. In fact, Sayville will remain profitable for them under the Navy's control.
The Telefunken company here made over $1 million.
Under the larger naval presence, Ludwig Bademan is given a reduced role at Sayville. Dejected, Ludwig's situation only worsens. The press adds fuel to the fire.
Ludwig had the day shift. Anything that happened on the other shifts, he wasn't aware of. Communications that were sinking ships, he had nothing to do with that. The whole cycle of suspicion was escalating even further and further.
These reports were being put out in the newspapers with the banners of what's going on in Sayville.
It just got more and more intense, and he was more and more uncomfortable.
People were not treating him the way they had before, and it was becoming very upsetting to him.
Ludwig sees a darkness growing as recent events threaten to divide an entire nation. An unseen casualty of war is emerging as Americans of German descent endure brutal backlash throughout the country. They are being accused of disloyalty and sedition as an atmosphere of prejudice and hate begins to boil.
The newspapers were filled with many things coming from the British press, which was, killing nuns and shooting orphans and things that did not actually happen. People did not really understand what was going on, and they were afraid.
There were a number of German families living in Sayville at the time. The WWII, he changed the spelling of his name slightly to reflect his protection against the anti-German feeling, and the Fritchie Bakery in Sayville went from being a German bakery to being a French bakery.
to have a German radio station in the middle of your town. Even though when it first came, everybody was excited, they actually went on almost witch hunts in some places. So it was a time where there was a great deal of distrust among many new immigrants and a lot of discrimination. It was a time of great fear.
It's amazing how suspicion can turn a community against a people.
People didn't want to hear anything German. They changed the name of a hamburger. Frankfurters. Oh, those were German words, we can't use them. So there was a great hysteria that was a feature of many of the communities throughout this area.
The German Americans were strongly pro-American, and a number of people who were of German descent fought in the American Army in World War I.
My grandfather, he came home and his wife, who was of German descent, had promised him German pork chops for dinner. He came home on the train. He goes, Alma, you got the pork chops? And she says, no, I couldn't. Peterman, the butcher, had decided that in his shop window he would put an American flag to prove that he was a real American. Only they decided he hung it up wrong, and they arrested him, and he's sitting in the jail. My grandfather promptly went down, took the key off the rack, unlocked Peterman, and said, get me my pork chops.
The U.S. will eventually enter the war, and the aggressions against the German immigrants will ramp up.
They were labeled Huns, a throwback to the barbarians of the Middle Ages. They were persecuted by the government, extorted to buy war bonds to prove their loyalty.
They shut magazines down, they shut newspapers down, they actually imprisoned people for saying un-American propaganda.
The harassment will be widespread and systemic. The Department of Justice will create a list of almost 500,000 Germans in America. Over 4,000 will be interred. Germans living in America will have careers ruined, property vandalized, and become victims of rampant terror from lawless mobs.
The German-American farmer John Meintz of Laverne, Minnesota, was abducted for failing to support a war bond drive. He was whipped, tarred and feathered, and threatened with murder if he returned to the state.
There will be bigotry, violence, and in some cases, murder.
Robert Prager was grabbed by a mob who heard his German accent and accused him of being a spy. He was stripped naked, paraded through the streets wrapped in an American flag, until they took him to a hanging tree and lynched him.
"11 men were ultimately charged with Prager's murder. They were all acquitted. In an atmosphere of anxiety, pressure mounts on Nikola Tesla, who is desperately trying to maintain neutrality himself and preserve his business relationship with Telefunken. But now, some of his friendships are coming under scrutiny.
Jonathan Zenneck was a captain in the army who had swept through Belgium during World War I as Germany takes over France. So there was certain distrust of Zenneck, along with Tesla. They were very closely associated with each other.
Zenneck has been accused of being a German code expert, a false assertion for his presence at Telefunken.
Tesla is now working for Telefunken while the Germans have sunk the Lusitania. Tesla, unbeknownst to him, is at the heart of all this because he doesn't really even know that he's fixing the equipment that's being used for some of these diabolical instrumentations.
Another associate of Tesla is receiving funds from Heinrich Albert to distribute German propaganda through his newspaper, The Fatherland.
George Sylvester Virac is a friend of Tesla's, and Virac is writing all this stuff about when Lusitania was sunk, that it was a good thing because more Germans would have been killed if the armaments on board that ship had been taken to the British. And so people started to hate Virac.
During July of 1915, Tesla needs to balance his relationships expertly, but some of his interests are colliding.
Morgan gave an astronomical amount of money for munitions to go to Britain and to France.
Another German plot is targeting one of Tesla's potential backers.
Frank Holt exploded a bomb in Washington, D.C., and then came up with a gun.
After attacking the Capitol building, Holt makes his way to New York.
Eric Munter, using the alias Frank Holt, took a train out from New York City here to Glen Cove with the goal of assassinating financier J.P. Morgan. Munter was a German-American, and his motivation was to stop Morgan's participation in funding the war against Germany.
Munter, a former instructor at Harvard, changed his name to avoid capture after poisoning his pregnant wife. Under the pseudonym Holt, he continues to teach at some of America's most prestigious universities.
When Munter arrived, he was able to walk right up to the front door. He then pushed past the butler and saw J.P. Morgan unattended, no security.
Morgan was so irate, he lunged at Holt, and Holt got off a couple of shots and shot Morgan in both thighs.
Munter was subdued by a combination of Morgan, Mrs. Morgan, and the butler. Munter was then brought down south here to the Glen Cove courthouse, to the jail cell where he was held.
Munter is transferred to New York. 2 days later, he commits suicide.
J.P. Morgan Jr. is in the hospital, and Tesla sends him a get well letter.
Morgan quickly recovers from the incident, but Tesla is having a more difficult time. Towering debt and recent events have forced him to surrender the deed to Wardenclyffe, though he is determined to get it back. In light of the Telefunken takeover, Tesla is asked by the press about his feelings on government control of wireless. For the answer, Tesla must have his own policy of neutrality.
Finding his supporters on both sides of the conflict, he needed to serve a diplomatic role.
He did feel that because of the sensitive nature of what could be transmitted, that a certain level of government oversight would be required, not only here, but globally. However, he did not want to see too much bureaucracy where it would stymie new innovation to improve humanity. So Tesla was in a very tough spot, and he had to find a way to strike a balance.
But as hard as Tesla tries, he is becoming more immersed in an unseen conflict.
Tesla is called in to their offices by Dr. Carl George Frank because their wireless system in New York City is broken down. They need him to fix it. And then it turns out a couple of months later that that particular wireless system was being used to send secret dispatches to German submarines. So Tesla doesn't know, but he's being used by Carl George Frank for this subterfuge.
Well, what has been hidden may soon come to light. Bernstorff is publicly pushing to keep America neutral. Privately, he's created layers of distance between himself and an organized campaign of sabotage. Meanwhile, Chief W.J. Flynn has been empowered by an executive order to widen his surveillance authority.
The Secret Service begins to follow George Sylvester Viereck, and he goes to see Privy Counsel Albert.
Agents Frank Burke and Bill Hoyton observed the two boarding a train at Rector Street. Hoyton follows Viereck as he exits at 23rd Street. Burke remains to watch Albert. Albert is immersed in a book, unaware as the train pulls into the station. He calls for the conductor to hold the door. In his rush to exit, the Privy Councillor makes a catastrophic mistake.
He leaves his briefcase.
Before Albert can retrieve it, Burke grabs the portfolio and heads out of the train.
The Secret Service guy runs away, and Albert tries to catch him, and he can't find him.
Burke disappears into the crowd. After a quick inspection of the briefcase contents, he wastes no time contacting Flynn. It is a treasure trove of intelligence.
In the briefcase is all the secret operations and their secret code names. A code name for Van Papen, a code name for Carl Boyette.
Organized efforts to sow dissent within America are revealed. Directly implicated is Ambassador Count von Bernstorff.
Germany was trying to keep the United States busy so we would stay out of Europe.
In one plot, German front organizations would flood American firms with fake purchase orders, trying to bottle up their factories and keep them from producing for the Allies.
Another area was to stir labor unrest.
German financing and support is being used to ferment strikes in munition plants across America.
They're infiltrating various areas on different fronts. For instance, they're exploding bombs on board ships, and they're monkey-wrenching industries, creating disinformation campaigns, and then they're even involved in assassination.
Flynn forwards all the incriminating information to the president.
It's given to Woodrow Wilson, and he does nothing about it.
While avoiding a diplomatic crisis, the aggression is hard to ignore.
There were threats against the rail network, as well as disrupting the transportation hub, communications hub, and business hub.
The saboteurs target trains carrying horses bound for the Allies. After 2 attempts to derail them fail, a German warfare plot is hatched by Dr. Anton Dilger to infect the animals with anthrax. Paul Koenig learns that the New York police guarding horse corrals and halts the mission. But Koenig's indictment will come before year's end. As the harsh winter approaches, the Telefunken Tower that once promised a closer bond between 2 countries ices up during a severe cold spell, putting the plant out of commission.
That made a problem. The only place for Bernstorff to be able to reach Germany was through the Telefunken station.
For the president and the count, spring can't arrive soon enough. In March of 1916, a tower in nearby Shoreham, New York, was deteriorating.
The newspapers said that the tower looked like a giant Martian from an H.G. Wells novel.
Tesla has sunk all into Wardenclyffe. He has put hundreds of thousands of dollars in, and he's hit a brick wall.
And the walls are crumbling at the site that has been partially vandalized and looted. His finances worse than ever. Tesla wonders if his relationship with Telefunken has caused a backlash.
The split is occurring in the world. You have the scientists, and you have the warriors. So there's a war going on because generals are fighting, and you've got this terrible World War I taking place. But at the same time, you have scientists who are internationally linked to each other, and they like each other. They don't want to be part of this war.
Tesla is forced into bankruptcy, but he needs to look forward if there is any hope to save his laboratory. His friend, Navy Captain Richmond P. Hobson, has always offered practical advice.
So through the years, Hobson kept insisting, come on, Nicky, send your remote control boat to the U.S. Navy. They could use it.
Termed a teleautomaton, it has been on display at Wardenclyffe since the early 1900s.
His invention utilized radio, remote control, and robotics, also a primitive logic gate.
Alterations to the original design create new defense possibilities.
Nikola Tesla experimented with his teleautomaton nearby here in Long Island Sound. One of the proposed uses was that it could be used as a guided torpedo.
As America inches closer to war, Tesla speaks with reporters on the use of electricity in future conflicts. According to local legend, Tesla illustrated one such use a short distance from Wardenclyffe.
My grandfather, Ray Daniel Hagerman, had witnessed a demonstration of Tesla. He grew up on Hagerman Landing Road in Rocky Point. I don't think he was an invited guest. I think he happened to see all the fancy cars, uniforms, etc., and just decided there's something going on the beach. I'm going to go see what it is. Nikola Tesla invited military brass from the Navy and Army to witness a remote control boat demonstration. They came down to Hagerman Landing Road, went to the beach and launched the remote weapons boat, and then launched the target boat. It was fairly large, maybe dinghy size, 8 foot or so. The guns on the weapons boat were able to be fired remotely. how many lives could be saved if we can send out remote craft, basically the drones of the sea. They were able to sink the target boat. Everything was operational.
A general from the U.S. Army said that they had no reason to buy it. They were not interested in it.
They dismissed this remote control weapon and said, it is a nice toy, but there's really no practical use for it in our war effort. It was successful, and the Navy and Army brass didn't think much of it and kind of laughed them off. I guess they missed the boat.
The danger on the high seas would continue. For Wilson, the sabotaging of U.S. commerce is of intense concern. On April 19, 1916, the president addresses Congress and threatens to sever diplomatic ties with Germany. It's May of 1916. The role of the German operators at Sayville has been reduced.
Ludwig Batterman was assigned to the Telefunken offices in the city.
He has scraped together enough to begin a life together with NC.
Even though she was 7 years younger, they still had an attraction, and eventually he married her. The Shattuck family had a lot of influence in Sayville. NC's parents helped alleviate the suspicion that the townspeople had.
Ludwig Batterman really became a part of the community.
But some former employees of Telefunken are about to test his loyalty. They've been charged with expanding the German communications network in Mexico, and they look to Ludwig for his expertise.
They tried to contact him, they wrote him letters, and he was real paranoid. He didn't want anything to do with it. He didn't want any connection. So we got the letters, he never even opened them up, he just tossed them aside.
Leading the operation in Mexico is the chief engineer for the interred ship Fatherland. They continue to pressure Ludwig for help.
People drove up and tried to see him and gain access to the station. It was a bad time for him, for sure.
The harassment continued from all sides.
The Secret Service just appeared at their house and went through their house looking for evidence, but they never found anything.
The agents periodically disrupt the Batterman home. At the same time, Ludwig's citizenship paperwork is held up, listed as lost.
He wanted to be an American. He wanted to be with his wife. He found out what it was not to be an American citizen.
They lived at their parents' house, and they had the Secret Service come right into their house, and their mother actually literally pushed them out with a broomstick.
Meanwhile, as the Navy attempts to expel belligerents from the airwaves, it finds itself at risk of expulsion.
Marconi is still very upset because he lost his contract with the U.S. Navy. So he sues the U.S. Navy for patent infringement. The Assistant Secretary of the Navy is Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So Roosevelt starts to do some research, and he discovers a very interesting letter.
The letter is from Nikola Tesla. Roosevelt believes that an old series of communications between Tesla and the government might help dispute Marconi's claim.
Roosevelt says we could now have proof that Tesla's system predates Marconi's, and it's a better system.
Tesla will also be testifying for Atlantic Communications in another suit brought by the president. The wireless war is expanding, and a day after Marconi files the suit, a world war is exploding. It is July 30th, 1916. The sun is yet to rise in Manhattan when suddenly the sky is filled by a blinding light.
Just behind the Statue of Liberty was an ammunition loading dump. It was a target-ripe environment for a saboteur.
The explosive force is so great, the small island in the harbor known as Black Tom is completely obliterated.
It was such a giant explosion that it was heard in Philadelphia and knocked out 1,000 windows in New York City.
It actually did some minor damage to the Statue of Liberty. It did damage through the harbor and blew the ships up, and of course killed a number of men that were working on the ammunition pier.
The Black Tom Munitions Depot stored 2 million pounds of ammunition destined for the Allies. The destruction points to Germany, though the charge will not be proven until years later.
For many, many days, the newspapers are filled up with stories about what happened, who was lost, and again, adding even more to this general fear of what Germany would do or could do.
In the next months, relations between the two countries will deteriorate further. By early February of 1917, Wilson severs diplomatic ties. Ambassador Bernstorff and other top officials are ordered to leave the country.
Finally, the United States wakes up and they kick out Captains Franz von Papen and Captain Karl Boyed. They should have been arrested, but of course they had diplomatic immunity.
On February 27, 1917, President Wilson learns of a secret communication dispatched by German Foreign Minister Arthur Zimmermann to the Mexican consulate.
Zimmermann suggested that if Mexico would actually attack the United States and wage a war, keep them busy, that Germany would then help Mexico take back their territory that they had lost to the United States.
The message is reportedly sent via 3 methods.
The Zimmermann telegram went through Telefunken from Seville to Mexico.
It was sent by courier. It was sent by diplomatic cable, but the wireless got it there the fastest. The Navy basically received it and sent it on. They didn't realize what it was because it was in diplomatic code when it went out.
The British knew it.
The British managed to get the message and to decode it.
The British did not tell us right away because that would give away the clue that the British had broken the German code. But eventually, the British, wanting us in the war, told Wilson the context of the Zimmermann telegram.
Another part of the message further antagonizes Wilson. It will be the last straw.
One of the things said in the Zimmermann telegram was that the Germans were going to be stepping up their submarine warfare. This was one thing that was very, very hard for Wilson to keep us out of the war.
The revelation leads to quick action at Seville.
The Navy sends in Marine Guards, full combat, and they completely take it out of the hands of the Germans, Telefunken Corporation. They electrify the fence, they did all sorts of security. They turned this into a Navy radio station with Navy personnel and guards on.
They weren't able to operate the German equipment, believe it or not, and use some of their own.
On April 6, 1917, America officially enters the conflict.
Wilson went to Congress and war was declared.
The next day, the U.S. government seizes control of the wireless airwaves. Later that afternoon, Karl Frank writes a letter to Ludwig Badermann, relieving him of his wireless duties. Within hours, Dr. Karl George Frank, president of Atlantic Communications, will be arrested with 18 others as German spies.
America now enters the war and Germany becomes an enemy, and Tesla is cut off from all the finances he was receiving because the deals with the Germans are now no longer valid. It means the end of any last chance he ever had to pay off the Waldorf Astoria so he could get back Wardenclyffe.
To make matters worse, a judgment has permitted Tesla's creditors to tear down Wardenclyffe Tower for scrap. In desperation, Tesla makes an extraordinary claim.
Wardenclyffe could be converted into a way to protect the United States against an incoming invasion and sink enemy ships from Wardenclyffe, which is right near the coast on Long Island. So he's appealing directly to President Wilson. He's saying, do not destroy this tower because this tower has military uses as well as the ability to send wireless information all over the world.
However, Tesla has yet to demonstrate any practical energy transmission from his unfinished tower.
Wilson basically ignored his plea to save Wardenclyffe.
On July 4th, 1917, the earth trembles as dynamite knocks Wardenclyffe Tower from its base. Additional explosions separate the cupola from its wooden beams as it crashes to the ground. The destruction will continue until Tesla's dream of wireless energy dies in a mound of mashed scrap metal and wood. The next day, the sad news continues for Tesla.
All the people that Tesla are working with are arrested. Jonathan Zenneck is put in handcuffs and arrested and taken to Ellis Island, and Ferdinand Braun is also arrested.
In the confusion of the events surrounding Telefunken, the press erroneously reports that Tesla's tower was destroyed by the U.S. government. Zenneck and Braun are likely interred for the perceived danger posed by their wireless knowledge.
Tesla's friends with Zenneck, so he makes his way to Ellis Island and visits him.
Zenneck will be held for the duration of the war. An ailing Ferdinand Braun will be placed under house arrest. He will never again return to his country.
Where Ferdinand Braun actually died in the United States.
The two scientists become another part of the unseen casualties of war. As German wireless experts are interred, Ludwig Badermann is completely exonerated by the U.S. Secret Service. He is reissued his papers for American citizenship. Ludwig Badermann will remain working in the field he loves. And on December 6, 1923, when Calvin Coolidge makes history, giving the first presidential radio address, it's made possible through a microphone hand-built by Ludwig Badermann. He will continue to help the industry evolve. Also helping to advance the medium would be Charles Apgar, who continued to work for the Marconi Company until 1921.
Did a bunch of work while he was at Marconi and helped develop what became the paper cone speaker. It was in every radio ever made, every early TV ever made, and unfortunately for all of his descendants, he did not get a patent on that.
The patent will be granted to inventor Claire Varan in 1932. So much creativity, yet so much destruction, is connected to a small wireless station in Sayville, New York. The world would endure 4 years of brutal conflict. The wireless battle would go on for decades. And as the Great War comes to pass, so does the lives of Marconi and Tesla before a verdict can be rendered. The case finally reaches the U.S. Supreme Court in 1943, while a new world war rages. In the shadow of another global conflict dependent on wireless, might the court's decision finally give some clarity as to radio's true inventor?
Marconi brought suit claiming infringement of 4 patents that were enhancements to wireless. The court's task was to decide whether the patents were valid or anticipated by prior art.
The U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the United States government had not infringed on Marconi's by then 40-year-old patent because it was based on an aspect of communication that had already previously been invented by Nikola Tesla.
The court rejected the argument that Tesla's only purpose had been to transmit electrical energy, reasoning that electrical waves transmitted by any wireless system are just one form of electrical energy.
The majority decision did recognize that Marconi was the first to do radio communication, and radio communication basically grew out of Marconi's initial work, and that other people had contributed different pieces of it along the way.
The U.S. Supreme Court ruled that Oliver Lodge and John Stone had both invented features of the disputed patents that had not been developed by Tesla or Marconi.
It really was this group effort, and you have all of these great scientists meeting in this very amazing place called Sayville, Long Island, where Telefunken had this wireless system. What an amazing time, and what an amazing conglomeration of these great scientists, but all for competing reasons.
pioneers of a world-changing technology. Spies, Subterfuge, and America's entry into global conflict were all linked through invisible threads to a wireless station called Telefunken, a station that transitioned a nation from wireless to war.